Should be recording. No, you're recording. Okay. So we move to the theory of price formation. Now, it essentially means that we're going to try and understand how supply and demand come together to form market prices. We're going to try and understand this process more in detail. So today we'll introduce some basic models of supply and demand and market equilibrium and offer some basic definitions of the key terms that are related. I'll just write down very briefly the key concepts, key terms, and then you'll understand the relationship between them as we go along. Market equilibrium. Total demand, fixed stock model. So don't be afraid. I'll explain in detail what it means. Supply, conventional supply and demand model. Supply and demand model. Concept of market clearing. Market clearing. Okay. There is one more concept that is covered in your book that I will market clearing.
And then what's after fixed?
Supply and demand model.
Oh, fixed.
Total demand, fixed stock, fixed supply or fixed stock. These two essentially show the same thing in two different ways. They describe the market equilibrium and how supply and demand work. There are two slightly different models, and I'll explain what is the difference and why we bother analyzing them both. There is the fifth concept here that is covered in your book, rents, that I will advise you, that I will not expect you to read, because I'm not satisfied with how this concept is covered. If you have time, I'll tell you just a few things about the rents that will explain why you shouldn't be reading the book and why those 2 or 3 sentences are, for now, everything that you need to know about it. So this is, we'll maybe say something briefly about rents or not, depending on time. But these 4 concepts we have to, that's the core that we have to understand. And then over the week, we will introduce some additional, on Wednesdays, some additional wrinkles to the story, some additional problems or complications of the theories of supply and demand. And on Friday, we will be talking about price controls. What happens when governments try to mess up with prices to determine administratively prices at a level which doesn't correspond to the market level. So let's start first with the model of total demand fixed stock. So you will understand the concept of market equilibrium in the context of both of these models. Total demand, fixed stock. Okay, so what does that mean? That means this is a type of model that is developed to explain the situations in which the quantity of a good that is being traded, that is being exchanged, is fixed, given in advance. So fixed stock means that the supply of goods is given in advance. There is 7 chocolate cakes allocated among 25 or 30 people in this room. And then we want to analyze what's going to happen, who is going to buy, who is going to sell their own chocolate cake, if any. So the simple graphical representation of this is that you have a conventional coordinating system with the price on the vertical axis, quantity on the horizontal axis. You have a conventional demand, which is not quite conventional in every respect, but it's conventional as far as the slope of the curve goes, which is downward sloping demand curve. And the supply of goods is fixed given, let's say, 7 units, which means that it's vertical. So it doesn't matter what the price, there are 7 cakes available. For now, you can assume that there could be produced. We ate one. could not be produced. So this is the supply curve representing the total stock of goods, which is fixed. Now, intuitively, if I were to ask you, define for me the market equilibrium, what would you say?
Where they intersect.
Yeah, that's so. The simplest possible explanation for market equilibrium, that's a situation in which supply equals demand. So that's the intersection of the demand and the supply. This will be the price, equilibrium price at which people will buy the good. So now, we need to answer here two questions. First, or to say something about the two characteristics of this model, and to explain why we use this model at all. Because you will recognize that in most situations, the quantity of goods that are supplied or sold on the market is not fixed. It changes. People produce more goods and services when the price is higher. So usually, we will see that later. If we talk about the theory of production, higher the price of a good, let's say that this is quantity that will be produced at price 1. If the price of some good increases, it's very likely that the producers will react to that by increasing production. Why is that? Why that happens? What do you think? This is theory of production. So that means that you're talking about the additional units that are being produced. So here the price changes, but we have 7 units. We imagine for a moment that we're just talking about the trade exchange. But if you include production, then with an increase in price, the quantity demanded will increase.
More people would want to manufacture the product because they can make more profit off it.
Yeah, the existing firms can make more profit. They can you can increase your revenue by increasing the number of units that you produce. But also the new firm that used to have a high cost before, if the price is $10, and you're a potential entrepreneur who can produce a unit of that good at $15, you're not going to enter the market. You cannot afford to waste scarce resources in order to produce something that you have to pay $15 in order to sell the product for $10. You would be operating at a loss. However, if the price goes to 20, it suddenly you become more profitable. So actually, at higher prices, the higher cost producers can afford to enter the market. That's the reason why the total supply of goods and services increases as the price goes up. So two things happen. First, what William said, that the existing firms that, let's say, produce 5 units can increase their production to 7 or 8 or 10 units. Higher price, you can sell more. You can produce and sell more. But also the firms that couldn't afford to sell a single unit because they were unprofitable can now enter the market and produce a quantity of goods. And then when you connect all the points, all the potential combinations of prices and quantities, you get the supply curve, which is vertical, upward. It's a conventional supply curve that talks about the dynamic market in which higher the price, higher the quantity demanded. In this particular case, we talk about one specific situation in which the price doesn't affect quantities. We assume that the goods are here available to us in advance, and we just look at one isolated problem. Remember what we said about economic models. Economics models are useful simplifications of reality that allow us to understand some theoretical problem that is important. So this total demand fixed stock model is a useful simplification of reality insofar as it assumes, contrary to what we know about most situations in the real world, that the stock of goods is given, available, fixed. why is this simplification made? This simplification is made in order for us to understand the logic of exchange. So we don't want to bother, we don't want to be bothered and to complicate the situation unnecessarily with the considerations of production. We want to separate exchange from production. And for the purposes of understanding the logic of exchange, the only thing that we need is a fixed supply of goods and preferences. So that's the justification for this model. The main characteristic of this model, the main fact that this model demonstrates, is that initial distribution of goods is irrelevant for the equilibrium distribution of goods. So what does that mean? You can imagine we are all here with different preferences for chocolate cakes. If the quantity of chocolate cakes is fixed and our preferences are given, an amount of money that we have is given, then it doesn't matter at all, and we are allowed to trade, all of us. There are no barriers or legal impediments for all of us to trade among ourselves. It doesn't matter which 7 persons are going to get the chocolate cakes. The same 7 people will end up with the cakes eventually after the exchange is made. So the goods will be moved from people who prefer them less to people who prefer them more, no matter who gets the goods at the beginning. So that's what it means, that initial distribution equilibrium distribution. So what is the equilibrium distribution? That simply means who is going to get the cake after the exchanges are made. Equilibrium. That's after. This is before. So before is irrelevant for after. So in your book, you have a rather complicated demonstration of this. I'm going to try and simplify the demonstration. Why is this so? Remember now when we discussed the theory of demand last week, and we said only people whose maximum buying price for a certain unit of a product is higher than the actual equilibrium price, actual price that they have to pay on the market. Only those people will buy. So maximum price has to be higher than market price. So that means that only people who value, let's say that the equilibrium price eventually will be $5 for a chocolate cake. And all of us have different preferences about the chocolate cake. So only people who value, if we find anyone who values a certain number of units of chocolate cakes higher than $5, they will buy. If they were not given in advance, we imagine that somebody just spread chocolate cakes randomly, gave it to 7 people randomly, not knowing anything about their preferences. If the persons who got chocolate cakes value a unit that they have more than $5, they will not sell that unit, of course. So if you're here on the demand curve and your reservation price, maximum buying price, how much you would pay on the market for a chocolate cake, if that's $6, and you can obtain only $5 on the market, then you would retain your cake, you wouldn't sell it. If your maximum buying price, if you were given a chocolate cake and your maximum buying price is, let's say, $3, would you sell it? Maximum price that you would pay on the market for it is $3. You can sell it for $5 gain. Of course, so everybody with maximum buying price lower than the equilibrium price will be selling. So then imagine a situation in which four people with reservation prices lower than $5 for given cakes. And 3 people whose reservation prices are higher than 5 per given cakes. Assuming now, for a moment, that all 3 of these value the second unit that they will acquire higher than $5. Okay? Let's say A, B, C. A, B, and C are 3 guys with who got 1 cake, and their reservation prices for the first unit of the cake are higher than $5. So they will retain, all of them will retain the cakes that they received. And now imagine that the preferences for the second unit now. So marginal utility decreases. First unit you prefer the most, and the second unit slightly less. Imagine that for A, the second unit, preference for the second unit is higher than 5, and for B, the second unit, the preference is higher than 5, and for C, it's smaller than 5. And imagine now that for A, the preference for the third unit is still higher than 5, for B is smaller than 5, and for C is obviously smaller than 5. What will be the equilibrium distribution of cakes? And here, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. These guys have only 1 cake each. So where these 4 cakes that we agreed that will be offered on the market, where these 4 cakes will end up? Who is going to get 4 cakes? And in which quantities? So the first unit, these 3 guys will retain because they obviously value the first unit more than $5. For the second unit, who values the cake more than A and B? So we need the fourth unit here as well, in order for all 4. A and B, you get the first 2 units. B. Second unit for A and second unit for B. C is out of the market. He values the second unit less than $5. He won't buy any more units. Okay? How about the remaining 2? Is there anyone else who value A? So A, third unit, and A, fourth unit. So eventually the equilibrium distribution will be that A will have 4 units, B will have 1 unit, B will have 2 units, and C will have 1 unit. That's the equilibrium distribution of cakes. It doesn't matter at all who has what at the beginning. This will be the result of exchange between them, even if we give the 7 cakes to completely different people. So you can demonstrate easily if you gave all 7 to G after a series of trade, it's going to end up this situation here. So that means that the market, the principle that we demonstrate here is that the market exchange is very efficient in moving goods towards people who prefer them more, irrespective of who has the goods right now. It's a demonstration of this principle, pen for a wristwatch, remember. We have the same amount of goods, but society is better off because people who prefer already existing goods are better matched with their preferences. The goods are better matched with the people with higher preferences. So A is better off with 4 chocolate cakes than only 1. And D, E, or G, they don't like chocolate cake. They prefer $5 that they didn't get in exchange and buy something else. So everybody's better off. So this is a demonstration how this simple principle, pen for a wristwatch. I'm better off when I get your wristwatch. You're better off when you get my pen. How it works in the system of market prices. So the exact same principle operates in the market. And just as it doesn't matter who gets a wristwatch, who gets a pen ex ante, what is the initial distribution of goods is, as long as you and me are allowed to exchange a pen for a wristwatch, the equilibrium distribution will be superior to our preferences will be satisfied. The same thing applies here. The only difference is that here we talk about monetary prices. The situation is more complicated. We have more than one person. Sometimes we have more than one good. But the concept of market equilibrium actually describes a situation in which goods and services are moved to the people who prefer them the most. And market equilibrium has 2 hallmarks, or 2 important parameters to it. Equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. Equilibrium price is a price at which goods or services will be traded, and equilibrium quantity is the quantity that will be exchanged. In this particular case, that's not quite correct. The quantity here is fixed. So you cannot talk about equilibrium quantity here because the quantity is what it is, but you can talk about equilibrium price. And this model, one of the reasons for why this model is used in your book uses almost exclusively this model of market equilibrium, is to show something that is very important in microeconomics, and that is that you can derive market prices solely and only from the fact of human preferences, subjective human preferences. So the market price here is directly dictated by the scarcity of good, by the available number of cakes. If you imagine that there are 9 cakes, supply will shift, then the demand, the equilibrium price will drop, and the equilibrium distribution of goods will be different. Probably D will want to own at least 1 chocolate cake. Supply 2. So the only 2 things that dictate market prices is relative scarcity or availability of resources and human preferences. That's why this is a relatively elegant model. Any questions thus far? Is this clear, this marginal utility calculation here, why A wants to have, so we simply assign preferences to A, B, and C here. And then the second unit, A wants to buy 3rd and 4th units. He will be the only buyer on the market for the remaining units of cake. One more definition here that is necessary. This is called total demand. total demand, fixed stock. You've seen what fixed stock means. The quantity is given in advance. What total demand means? How demand could be not total? In which sense? In the following sense. So total demand means effective demand. So there are two components to the total demand. Effective demand, that's a demand or purchasing demand. That means how many units will change hands. So in this particular case, how many units changed hands? 4. 3 remained with the people who already had them. A, B, and C retained their cakes because they value the cake higher than the market price that they can obtain for the cake, $5. And the 4 remaining units were redistributed to A, B, and C according to their preferences and their maximum bidding prices in order to satisfy their preferences. So then we can say that the total demand was 7, but only 4 effective demand, or purchasing demand, is 4. That's the number of units that are exchanged on the market. So that's the effective demand, or we can call it purchasing demand. The remaining 3 are called the reservation demand to hold. So total demand consists of effective demand plus reservation demand. Reservation demand to hold, or as they say in your book, to own. That's the same thing. Reservation demand to own or to hold. So what is that? Reservation demand is a demand that you have for a certain product that is assigned to you before the trades take place, that you don't want to sell because the market price that you can obtain for a product is lower than the minimum price at which you would sell it. So we know that equilibrium is when supply equals demand. Supply is 7. When you, before you make the fourth trade, you will have a surplus. Actually, the equilibrium when the total quantity demanded is 7, only after the 4 trades are made. I will explain that further in a few minutes. But the total demand to hold, the total demand for a good consists of demand, reservation demand to hold, which means people who won't sell their already existing units that they own, plus demand for the units that will change hands that people would want to sell. Okay. Now, this is a model. This is developed by a British economist, Philip Wicksteed. And the reason why Wicksteed bothered developing this model are kind of complicated, but the main reason was that Wicksteed argued that supply doesn't exist. Why did he say so? Because he argued that subjective utility and subjective preferences are the only factors that are responsible for the phenomenon of market prices. That supply here would be demand to sell, or the other side of the transaction, not demand to sell, but actually selling within this transaction between the 4 weaker demanders and 3 stronger demanders. The concept of supply is usually defined is derived from the concept of costs. And classical economy, classical political economy, classical economics mystified the concept of cost in Adam Smith and later on the founder of economic science, Adam Smith and David Ricardo, and eventually Karl Marx. The way how costs were understood was cost of production equals the value of labor invested in production of a good. So there was this kind of dichotomous or schizophrenic theory of value in which the market price was considered to be the equilibrium between subjective preferences on the demand side, how much we want to buy stuff, and on the other hand, objective labor costs, how many labor units were invested in production of goods. So then demand will be determined by the preferences and supply will be determined by objective labor costs. And then the price will be the equilibrium between these. And Wicksteed says that's incorrect, actually. That's not how prices work. So then we better completely dispose of this fiction of the supply curve based on objective labor costs and analyze market in this way, in which we treat supply as something which is given, how many units are there, and treat all exchanges not as exchanges between suppliers and demanders, but between the two kinds of demanders. So that's kind of complicated theoretical reason why this model was developed, and Auchian and Allen are Wicksteedians in that regard. They like this model. Although this model is not the textbook model of market equilibrium, market prices. This supply and demand model, conventional supply and demand model, is much more often used. You don't have this in your book, but I simply have to give you this model because it is stock and trade economic analysis. Everybody is using it, and it's useful in its own way. So here is the demand. Here is the supply. Here is the equilibrium price. Here is the equilibrium quantity. What is the difference between this model and that model? A couple of differences. This demand here is not total demand. It's just effective demand. So this conventional demand curve here tells you at every given market price which quantity, how many units of a good will be demanded. $10, whatever. 1 unit, $9. 3 units, $6. 9 units, and so on down the line. The inverse relationship between the price and quantity demanded. But this demand here describes just how many units will change hands at any given price, which corresponds to the effective demand part of this curve here. So the equivalent of this demand here would be just 4 units that change hands. That's what this conventional demand measures. What would be on the supply curve here? On the supply curve will be the units that are sold. So the equilibrium quantity here will be 4. 4 units sold, 4 unit loads. That's the equilibrium. The equilibrium price would be the same price, $5. You simply exclude from this market analysis the units that are not traded. And the supply curve is upward sloping. One of the reasons is this. So we can use one of the advantages of this conventional supply and demand analysis is that we can use it to analyze what happens with production. You can use the conventional supply and demand model to analyze production, whereas we cannot so easily adapt this model to production. If something treats quantity available as fixed and given variable, it's difficult to utilize that model to explain production, which is a change in quantity. But you can you can employ the supply curve to show just buying and selling of the goods that are already available. So at a lower price, fewer people will sell. Why fewer people will sell at a lower price? Because there will be fewer people who value whose evaluation is very low. Would be ready to sell at $3. As the price increases, even people who prefer chocolate cake more will be ready to sell. So then as the price goes up, the quantity sold will increase. Just as here, it increases first. The first unit is sold. Person A, and so on. This is supply and demand. Conventional analysis. Another use of this model is that it can explain very well the concept of market clearing. It can explain very well why market is an efficient mechanism. So market equilibrium is a situation whereby supply equals demand. That's equilibrium. If quantity supplied, for whatever reason, is not equal to quantity demand, this is a disequilibrium. And that's market inefficiency. So if quantity supplied in the market is greater than quantity demanded, what is that called? That's a surplus. Or if quantity supplied is smaller than quantity demanded, that's a shortage. Not to be confused with scarcity. So what is the difference between shortage and scarcity? Anyone knows, right? Right, but I think I mentioned it once. You have that covered in your book. So scarcity is with us no matter the situation. We cannot overcome the scarcity. Scarcity means that our ends are unlimited in principle, whereas the means to satisfy our ends are always limited. So we have to make choices and sacrifice some things in order to achieve other things. Whereas shortage means an artificial situation in which the market price is not in equilibrium. That supply and demand are not in equilibrium. So let's imagine here that the price for whatever reason increased. It was $5 and then it's now $7. What happens to quantity supplied and quantity demanded? This is quantity demanded here. This is a new quantity supplied. It's a surplus. If the equilibrium price is lower than the actual market price, for whatever reason, it can happen for many reasons. Usually involving government, but sometimes even without government. Oh, one more thing. Can you tell me on this graph who is going to be exchanging goods with whom in the equilibrium? These people on the demand curve, whose maximum buying prices are greater than the equilibrium price. They will be buying. Of course, you buy only if your maximum buying price that you're ready to pay for a product is greater than the market price that you have to pay. You derive what we call consumer surplus from that. I'm ready to pay $7 for something, I can obtain it for $5. $2 is my consumer surplus. On the seller's side, who's going to be selling? So these are more competitive or more competent buyers or people who are ready to bid up price higher. And at the minimum to pay slightly higher than the actual price that they buy. So the trade is always unequal. The reason why people exchange stuff is that they expect the benefit for them to be greater than the sacrifice that they make. Sellers, what about sellers? There are two ways to think about it. If we assume that the goods are already given, then what is relevant is your minimum selling price. That is dictated by your preference. So if you're given a chocolate cake and you want to sell it for less than $3. And market price is, so minimum price at which you would sell is $3. And the actual price that you can obtain on the market is $5. Are you going to sell? Yeah, you sell. And this $2 difference is called producer surplus or seller surplus. So you see more competitive sellers, people who will get the chance to trade with more competitive buyers, are people who ask lower prices. Actually, who trades in the market are people who are ready to pay the most and people who are ready to charge the least. These two groups trade. These people over here, they charge high prices. That's why they don't get the chance to pay. And these people here are stingy. They don't like to offer high prices. They're also outside of the market. So lavish buyers and dirt cheap sellers are people who trade. Others are outside of the market. So now what happens when the price increases here? You will see that one part of the demand curve is eliminated from the market. So people whose maximum buying prices are between 5 and 7, who with the equilibrium price of 5 would be participating in the market. Some of them will buy 1 unit, some of them will buy 3 units, it doesn't matter, but most of them, all of them will be participating in the market, are now outside of the market. Because the market price is 7, and their maximum buying price is somewhere between 5 and 7. So there is doesn't make any sense for them to buy. So you see that the quantity demanded will shrink. What's going to happen to quantity supplied? It will increase, because higher the price, more people want to sell. So classic example of this that we will analyze on Friday is the minimum wage. Imagine this. $5 or let's say $10 minimum wage is determined by the demand for minimum wage labor and supply of minimum wage labor. Supply is provided by workers, demand is provided by employers who want to hire minimum wage workers. If government says you have to charge $15 or it's illegal, what happens then? That the supply of labor increases. Much more people want to work for $15 minimum wage than for $10. And demand decreases because fewer employers will be ready to hire somebody for $15 for the same job than for $10. So you have the surplus of labor. It's a demonstration why minimum wage leads to higher unemployment. What is unemployment? Unemployment is the surplus supply of labor over the demand. So what is the way how the market eliminates the surplus in the absence of any government impediments? By allowing suppliers and demanders to readjust, to renegotiate the terms of exchange. So sorry guys, you cannot sell all of your goods and services at $7. You have to negotiate with demanders who are now in a better negotiating position. They can dictate or disproportionately influence the terms of exchange. So now the sellers, in order to sell their surpluses, have to lower the price. As they lower the price, what happens? Two things in the same time. As the price starts inching down, demand increases. You know, the first law of demand. Lower the price, higher the quantity demand. So the quantity demanded will start increasing slowly as the price goes down. The price has to go down because suppliers are in an inferior negotiating position vis-a-vis buyers. There are fewer buyers and more sellers with the surplus goods. If you want to sell whatever you produce, you have to offer a price discount to buyers. So one thing that happens is that the demand increases now because it's cheaper, but at the same time supply starts shrinking. Some people drop out of the market who could afford to sell at $7, but who cannot afford to sell at $6. So in our case, the minimum wage labor, workers with higher productivity will drop out of the market. So you see one of the ironies, actually, the minimum wage laws subsidize not the minimum wage workers, the poor people, but workers with higher productivity, those who can qualify for $13, $14, $15 wages. They will be the first to drop out of the market if the minimum wage is abolished. So the supply will shrink and the demand will increase until the moment when they reach the equilibrium. And this process of readjustment of quantity supplied and demanded is called market clearing. So market clears the surpluses and shortages. What is a shortage? Just the equivalent application if the price is lower from the equilibrium price. Then quantity demanded, you just flip the sides here. Quantity demanded will be higher than quantity supplied. Okay? Now, who is now in a better negotiating position? Whoever is more scarce. The demanders are now in a suppliers, I'm sorry. Suppliers, shortage. Suppliers are in a better negotiating position. So I can give you more, but I'll sell you more, but you have to pay me more per unit. So as the price goes up, this entire part of the demand curve that was outside of the market now enters the market. Actually exits the market, so the demand shrinks and the supply increases as price goes up. This part of the demand is eliminated because people don't buy because the price is higher. Price goes up, demand goes down, and the supply increases. The price goes up, supply increases. So this is called market clearing. Any final questions? Anything? Oh. Okay, see you on Wednesday.